In the recently released game called Hide or Die, you and 15 strangers are thrown into this horrifying world known as Bale County, where you're either going to embrace the corruption around you to kill everyone else, or simply hide away until someone else does that killing for you. Regardless, in the end of it all, the game sticks true to itself. It's either hide or die. But rather than focusing on game mechanics, today I'm going to be reviewing the world of Hide or Die. Yet, before I can do that, it would only be fair to get us all on the same page as to what I think the narrative of Hide or Die is. So let's start somewhere. What is the story of Hide or Die? The world is set within Bale County. It's this post-apocalyptic world where the surviving inhabitants are going to be put into two distinct categories. Those that are fighting against the corruption, the survivors, and those who embrace this corruption and seek out destruction, called the Hunters. The star of this show is of course going to be our playable character, who, armed with nothing but their cell phone, emerges from a bunker to gather supplies. On our quest to forage for supplies, we are constantly aware of the fact that we are being hunted. The hunters that we have been hearing from the safety of our bunker feast on the destruction of those that are still clinging to sanity. Yet, for the sake of our own survival, we are forced to march into the world. Along the way, the world itself seems to be playing tricks on our minds. Shelves collapse without warning, doors open and close at random, trash cans and trees are creaking and moaning, all just to get a reaction out of us and to make us question ourselves. As we gather supplies, the screams of those that are less fortunate than us seem to fill the air as the killers take out survivor after survivor. Yet, this incoming toxic storm is forcing us and the killers into closer proximity. It is a significantly increased risk, but it's one that we need to be taking to survive. Now, after we finally gather enough materials in order to wait out the storm that gets ever closer to us, we start making our way back to our bunker. It's at this point where we come face to face with the hunter that has been tracking us down this whole time. Despite our best efforts to fend them off using the different guns and traps that we have found throughout our journey, we too fall to the hunter, falling to the floor, dead. Simply because the game isn't that balanced yet, because it's in early access to alpha. So that is our story. Now we're going to talk about the different design decisions that were made by the developers, intentional or otherwise, that help drive Hide or Die's narrative even further. For the purposes of this review, we are going to be focusing on three fundamental areas: art design, dialogue, and game mechanics. Art design. So for our discussion of art design, we are going to be answering one simple question. How do the artistic choices made help push the narrative within Hide or Die? The realistic place to start this discussion is with the graphic direction that Hide or Die takes. Hide or Die builds its world using this skewed, cartoonish, realistic approach. This leads to both the environment and the characters within the game all feel eerie and slightly off. Now, this could simply be attributed to the fact that this is an independently developed game that's in its early access period, but I prefer to assume some more thought went into this. I like to think that this design choice was done on purpose, to demonstrate that within the world of Bale County, truly everything is corrupted. Every detail of the environment, from the trees to your character, is corrupt and skewed. This is great for our overall narrative, as the world constantly reminding us that everything is going to take us down and be this corrupt force is a great tone setter for a survival horror experience. Another thing that will quickly become obvious is that this whole world is kept to a very dim lighting. This is fantastic for furthering the narrative of our story, because one of the most typical tropes for horrific scenes in both games and movies is this dark and ominous environment. There's just something off-putting about darkness and all of the unknowns that it brings into play. This sets people on edge, and that causes the overall experience and narrative of our horror to be enhanced. Now, lighting aside, the developers of Hide or Die do know what the environment needs to be for this typical horror experience, and they are leveraging our expectations of these areas to the fullest in order to push their horror story further. Traditional horror locations such as forests without any foliage, abandoned amusement parks, and things like butcher shops all play within our expectations that something horrible is going to go wrong. And it doesn't hurt that whenever I've played in either of these locations, I've gotten jump scared by the hunters. Overall, the art direction within Hide or Die does help sell the narrative that the developers are going for. Every detail, from the lighting to the fact that you can see mangled bodies in the streets or people hung in the forest, helps drive home the fact that you are being hunted and the whole world around you is trying to get you. So now we're moving our discussion into dialogue. This section is obviously going to be brief, as there is no actual dialogue between characters in Hide or Die. Yet, in the communication front of things, there is one important attribute of this game that I am going to be highlighting, as it does further the immersion of this game. In my admittedly limited experience with the horror genre, I still know one thing to be true. In every single parody or thing that I hear about horror, horror villains just love to toy with their victims, and this trope has again successfully made its way within to Hide or Die. And I'm actually pretty happy about that. Allow me to explain. In Hide or Die, the hunters are constantly talking. They're trying to get a reaction from their prey, attempting to make them behave in ways that they would not normally. To me, horror games would need to have an aspect like this in order to be successful. Playing off of tropes is not a bad thing. I would argue that it's a good thing, because tropes set expectation, and Hide or Die uses this trope to meet an expectation set within the audience's mind. It makes me genuinely happy to see these minor details go into games, because such a minor thing, such as just putting a little bit of random rambling dialogue in, really adds this extra layer of immersion to the whole experience. Now, finally, we're here to talk about game mechanics. Game mechanics are the best way for games to create an experience that the player can remember for the rest of time. But how do these often criticized game mechanics help drive the narrative of the story? The first mechanic I'm going to talk about is the different fuse boxes. To quickly go over it, the human players can weaken the hunter's power by putting themselves out in the open and activating these different fuse boxes. This is a high risk, high reward mechanic, and it's very fun to play. But I would argue that this mechanic does nothing to push the story's narrative. Hear me out. In what world does anyone with a shred of sanity put themselves out in the open to potentially slow down the hunter for a couple seconds that would now know exactly where you are? Remember, the narrative that I've been pushing is that you, the character that has been foraging for supplies, then sprinting back to your secure bunker in order to escape the storm of crazy fog, is not gonna want to expose themselves. So this admittedly fun mechanic loses a lot of its charm strictly from a narrative standpoint, because I cannot think of a single person who would risk their lives and forfeit their otherwise hidden position to the only entity on the map that is trying to stop them from reaching their overall goal. The next mechanic I want to talk about is the cell phone that's given to your character. This cell phone gives you access to the map, a flashlight, and texting a group chat that conveniently only has the living survivors in it. I personally like to imagine that the hunter is also in this group chat and he's like the server admin, but you can do with that what you will. I would argue that this cell phone does actually push the survival narrative of Hide or Die for the following reasons. The cell phone's battery is always low, and that personally stresses me out. I have no idea why, but I check that cell phone an unnecessary amount of times because I'm convinced that one of these times the whole phone's just gonna die and I'm gonna be, without power. Second, the map application helps you track the storm, which is important to being able to survive the storm, and I personally think that this kind of technology would exist. Third, though this will not actually factor into every single match that you play, having a group of players that is like half role-playing within the group chat takes the game to another level. Does the group chat push the narrative when everyone's being toxic? No, it does not. But in the 1% of situations where people are being fun to be around, it's like the cherry on top of a delicious ice cream. The final mechanic that I want to discuss is the use of the different items and weapons that are scattered throughout the world. Up until you're the last survivor standing, you are only allowed to pick up the limited arsenal of utility items that could potentially help you get out of a pinch when death starts knocking on the door. The mechanic of foraging for survival materials is of course going to add to our overall narrative of surviving. Not only that, it makes the other aspect of the game shine as well. You are forced to adventure into the world in hopes of finding a stun gun or a smoke grenade, which is going to expose you to all of the design details that can otherwise be ignored if you were to go and camp out in a corner somewhere. On top of this, there is nothing scarier and yet at the same time rewarding than coming face to face with the hunter and then using these different items to make a great escape. You're gonna feel this rush of different emotions colliding as you wonder if the hunter is gonna get you, as you blindly run in the opposite direction praying that you actually got away. Now, overall, as far as horror narratives go, Hide or Die does not try to break out of the mold, but yet, with extremely limited options for multiplayer horror games, I don't think it has to. For an early access title, the overall development of the world and its corresponding narrative is actually pretty fun, and I believe playing this game with this narrative in mind can change the overall experience of the game. Overall, I'm going to give Hide or Die this chicken dinner kind of vibe. Because it's nothing fancy, it's nothing too far out of the box, but it's still a good thing to go and cycle back to whenever you're in the mood for it. If you have $30 lying around and fancy yourself to go get scared, go give Hide or Die a try. But that is everything I have to say for this video. If you enjoyed, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.